The encounter that shook the skies. The luxury lounge of Solara Airlines, one of the world's most prestigious carriers, was a haven of exclusivity. The air was perfumed with subtle notes of lavender, and the decor screamed opulence. Gold-accented furniture, velvet seats, and panoramic views of the bustling tarmac below. Guests milled about in quiet elegance, sipping aged scotch or cappuccinos, their conversations muted but brimming with an air of privilege. Jasmine Carter, a poised and highly accomplished businesswoman, stepped into this elite world, her heels clicking against the pristine marble floor. Her tailored white suit fit her like a second skin, and her polished leather briefcase swung gently at her side. Her every step exuded confidence, yet her demeanor remained approachable, a balance honed through years of navigating spaces where she was often the only black woman in the room. She glanced around and took a deep breath. This meeting wasn't just another work trip. It was the final stage in securing a multimillion-dollar contract for her firm. She approached the front desk with her usual grace, handing her boarding pass and membership card to the young attendant. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the attendant said, his tone polite, but his eyes betraying a flicker of doubt as he examined her documents. He hesitated, the moment stretching into an awkward silence. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady. The attendant's smile faltered. "Just a moment, ma'am," he muttered, disappearing behind the desk. Jasmine stood there, sensing the quiet ripple of attention her presence was drawing. The unspoken question hung in the air. What's she doing here? Moments later, a woman with sharp features and a crimson blazer emerged. Her name tag read, Amelia, lounge manager. Her eyes scanned Jasmine with a cool, clinical precision that felt more invasive than welcoming. "Miss Carter, is it?" Amelia began, her tone dripping with a condescension that immediately put Jasmine on edge. She held Jasmine's membership card as though it were counterfeit currency. "Are you aware this is the Solara First Class Lounge?" Jasmine's expression didn't waver. "Yes, I am. I've been a platinum member for over 5 years." Amelia's lips curved into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've had issues with unauthorized use of these cards recently. I'll need to verify this." Jasmine's grip on her briefcase tightened, but she refused to let her irritation show. "By all means," she replied evenly, gesturing for Amelia to proceed. Amelia nodded curtly and walked away, leaving Jasmine standing alone. The other patrons had begun to whisper, their furtive glances not as discreet as they thought. Jasmine caught snippets of their murmurs, the words unauthorized and fraud floating through the air like poison. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours before Amelia returned. Her expression had shifted slightly, but her demeanor remained icy. "It appears your membership is valid," she said, her words clipped. "However, I must remind you that our lounge maintains a certain standard of decorum." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "And what standard might that be?" Amelia tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "We expect our members to reflect the exclusivity of this space." The insult, wrapped in professionalism, was clear. Jasmine's face remained calm, though her chest burned with indignation. "Thank you for clarifying," she replied coolly, taking her documents and walking to a seat in the corner of the lounge. She sat down, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for her phone. Years of resilience had prepared her for moments like this, but no amount of success could dull the sting of such blatant disrespect. Taking a deep breath, she scrolled through her contacts and pressed the number for Anderson Quinn, her company's chief operating officer. "This is Jasmine Carter," she said when he answered. "We need to discuss our contract with Solara Airlines." Her calm tone masked the storm brewing inside her. The minutes ticked by as Jasmine waited, her phone silent after the call. Around her, the hum of the lounge continued, punctuated by occasional laughter and the clink of glasses. Amelia's voice rang out from the counter, light and conversational, as though nothing had happened. Jasmine could feel the weight of every glance and whisper directed at her. She knew this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger systemic problem. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. Anderson's name lit up the screen. "I got your message," he said. "What happened?" Jasmine recounted the encounter, her voice steady but simmering with anger. Anderson listened intently, his occasional murmurs of agreement punctuating her account. "This is unacceptable," he said when she finished. "Do you want me to start the termination process for the contract?" "Not yet," Jasmine replied. "I want them to feel the weight of what they've done. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been made to feel like they don't belong." Anderson's chuckle was low and approving. "Understood. Just say the word." As Jasmine ended the call, a commotion drew her attention. Amelia was speaking on the phone, her earlier confidence now replaced with visible unease. She glanced toward Jasmine repeatedly, her expression growing paler with each look. The lounge staff began exchanging nervous whispers. A younger attendant muttered something Jasmine couldn't hear, but the fear in his eyes spoke volumes. The air in the lounge grew heavier, the tension palpable. Jasmine sat back in her seat, her expression calm. She had no intention of causing a scene. The wheels of justice had already been set in motion, and she would ensure they didn't stop until real change was achieved. Amelia's phone call ended abruptly. She approached Jasmine's table, her steps hesitant. "Miss Carter," she began, her tone a stark contrast to her earlier arrogance. "I'd like to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier." Jasmine looked up, her gaze steady. "Misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice calm. "Is that what you're calling it?" Amelia faltered. "I assure you, we meant no disrespect." "You meant no disrespect," Jasmine interrupted, her tone sharpening. "Yet you assumed I didn't belong here. You questioned my membership and implied I wasn't refined enough for your lounge. Tell me, Amelia, would you have done the same if I looked different?" Amelia's mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence stretched, heavy and unyielding. "Actions have consequences," Jasmine said finally, "and you're about to learn that firsthand." With that, she picked up her phone and dialed Anderson. "Pull the trigger," she said simply. On the other end, Anderson's response was swift. "Consider it done." The storm was just beginning. The contract that shattered the skies. The luxurious facade of Solara Airlines began to show cracks as Jasmine Carter's call to Anderson Quinn set a series of unstoppable events in motion. At Solara's headquarters, nestled in a glittering high-rise overlooking downtown Manhattan, the wheels were already turning. Anderson, as chief operating officer of one of the most influential logistics firms in the country, wasted no time initiating discussions that would shake the airline's foundations. Jasmine sat in her office the morning after the lounge incident, the sunrise casting long, golden rays through the tall windows. Despite the calm exterior of her minimalist office, adorned with carefully curated art and polished furniture, the energy in the room was electric. Jasmine scrolled through her email, her inbox filled with messages from Anderson and other senior executives. Each message hinted at the seismic shift they were orchestrating, terminating their multi-million-dollar contract with Solara Airlines. Her assistant, Elena, stepped in quietly, holding a tray with coffee and a stack of morning briefings. "Good morning, Miss Carter," she said, her tone hesitant. "I thought you'd want to see the social media reports. It's already trending." Jasmine looked up. "Trending?" Elena nodded, setting the papers on Jasmine's desk. Someone in the lounge recorded part of the interaction. "It's gone viral overnight." Jasmine's brow furrowed as she picked up the top sheet, her eyes scanning the printed screenshots of tweets, video clips, and comment threads. Hashtags like #JusticeForJasmine and #SolaraScandal flooded social media platforms. The video, captured by an anonymous passenger, showed Amelia speaking down to Jasmine, her words dripping with condescension. It was accompanied by subtitles that highlighted the inherent bias in her tone. "The video has over 3 million views," Elena added softly. "And growing." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, processing the implications, While she hadn't sought public attention, the exposure presented an opportunity, a chance to shine a light on the systemic discrimination she'd faced. But with that opportunity came responsibility. She knew she couldn't afford to misstep. "Thank you, Elena," Jasmine said finally, her voice steady. "Please arrange for a meeting with Anderson and the PR team. We need to craft a response." Elena nodded and exited the room. Jasmine took a deep breath, staring at the rising sun. This was no longer just about her experience. It was about a larger truth, one that couldn't be ignored any longer. At Solara Airlines headquarters, chaos reigned. The video had reached their executive team before the workday even began. In the sleek, glass-walled boardroom, a crisis meeting was underway. Edward Langston, the airline's regional director, paced back and forth, his face flushed with frustration. "This is a disaster," Edward growled, slamming a stack of papers onto the conference table. "How the hell did this happen?" The other executives exchanged uneasy glances. No one dared speak first. Finally, a junior PR manager hesitantly raised her hand. "Sir, it seems the staff at the lounge mishandled the situation. The customer, Jasmine Carter, is a prominent businesswoman." "I know who she is," Edward snapped, cutting her off. "What I want to know is why this wasn't stopped before it escalated into a public relations nightmare." The room fell silent again. Edward's phone buzzed on the table, and he snatched it up, his eyes scanning the screen. His face paled as he read the email from Anderson Quinn's office. Subject: Notice of contract termination. The email was succinct but damning, outlining the reasons for the termination of the logistics firm's contract with Solara Airlines. It highlighted the discriminatory behavior Jasmine had endured, citing it as a breach of their shared corporate values. The email ended with a chilling promise: "We will be exploring alternative partnerships that align with our commitment to equity and inclusion." Edward sank into his chair, his mind racing. Losing the contract wasn't just a financial blow. It was a reputational one. Solara prided itself on being the epitome of luxury and exclusivity, but this incident threatened to tarnish that image permanently. "Get Amelia in here," Edward barked. Now. Amelia sat in a small, glass-walled office adjacent to the lounge, her fingers nervously tapping against her desk. The viral video had reached her phone hours earlier, and her name was already being dragged through the mud online. She glanced at her reflection in the glass, her usually sharp appearance now slightly disheveled. For the first time, the weight of her actions was beginning to sink in. When Edward entered, his presence was like a storm cloud. He closed the door with a deliberate click, his expression unreadable. Amelia stood, wringing her hands nervously. "Sir, I—" "Sit down," Edward said coldly, cutting her off. She obeyed, her knees trembling slightly as she sank into the chair. He placed the printed email on the desk in front of her. "Do you know what this is?" Amelia's eyes darted to the page, and her stomach dropped as she read the words. "Termination," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Termination of one of our largest contracts," Edward clarified, his tone sharp. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This isn't just about you, Amelia. Your actions have put the entire company in jeopardy." "I didn't mean," she began, but Edward raised a hand to silence her. "Intent doesn't matter," he said. "The impact does. You humiliated a valued customer, and now the world knows about it. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending a full investigation." Amelia's face drained of color. "Suspended," she stammered. "But—" "This conversation is over," Edward said firmly, rising to his feet. "You'll be escorted out by security." Amelia's protests fell on deaf ears as two guards entered the room, their presence as unyielding as Edward's decision. She was led away, her head bowed in shame. Back in her office, Jasmine received an update from Anderson. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of satisfaction as he relayed the news. "They've officially terminated Amelia and issued a public apology," he said. "Their PR team is scrambling to contain the damage, but it's not working. The hashtags are still trending, and the story's gaining traction with mainstream media. Jasmine nodded, though her expression remained serious. Good, but this isn't just about Amelia. Solara needs to address the deeper issues, the culture that allowed this to happen. Anderson hesitated. Are you thinking of pushing for a public investigation? Jasmine's gaze was steely. Not just thinking about it. I'm committed to it. If they want to make this right, it's going to take more than firing one person. They need to rebuild from the ground up. Anderson chuckled softly. Understood. I'll start assembling the legal team. Jasmine ended the call, her resolve solidifying. This was no longer just about her. It was about holding power accountable and ensuring that no one else had to endure what she had. The battle was far from over, but Jasmine Carter was ready to fight. The stage was set, and the fallout from Solara's actions would soon ripple across industries and borders. Jasmine's quest for justice wasn't just about accountability. It was about transformation. And she wouldn't stop until the skies were truly open for everyone. The spark that ignited a movement. The fallout from Solara Airlines' mistreatment of Jasmine Carter had grown into an unstoppable storm. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #JusticeForJasmine, #SolaraScandal, and #NorumForracism. News outlets from around the world covered the viral video, dissecting every detail of the encounter. Commentary ranged from scathing critiques of systemic discrimination to broader discussions about equity in corporate spaces. Jasmine's name had become synonymous with a growing movement demanding accountability from those in power. Jasmine sat in the middle of her sleek conference room, her team of advisors gathered around her. The tension in the room was palpable, but Jasmine radiated a calm, commanding presence. On the large screen at the head of the table, a live feed displayed a news anchor discussing the scandal. Solara Airlines, once synonymous with luxury, now finds itself embroiled in a public relations nightmare. The viral video showing their lounge manager's treatment of prominent businesswoman Jasmine Carter has sparked outrage, raising serious questions about systemic bias in the aviation industry. Jasmine muted the television and turned to her team. We're no longer just responding to an incident, she said. This is a turning point. What we do next matters, not just for us, but for every individual who has ever been treated as though they don't belong. Her COO, Anderson Quinn, leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I've spoken to our legal team. They're ready to move forward with a formal complaint against Solara. This won't just hold them accountable. It'll expose the systemic issues within their organization. A young public relations advisor, Claire, chimed in. We've also received dozens of messages from former Solara employees. Many of them describe similar instances of bias and discrimination, both toward staff and customers. Some are willing to come forward publicly. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. Good, but we need to be strategic. This isn't just about shaming Solara. It's about creating lasting change. Meanwhile, at Solara's headquarters, the crisis had reached new heights. Edward Langston, the regional director, stood in the middle of an emergency board meeting. The tension in the room was suffocating, as executives scrambled to salvage the company's crumbling reputation. We've issued a formal apology, Edward said, his voice clipped. We've terminated the lounge manager responsible and promised to implement mandatory diversity training. It's not enough. One of the board members snapped. Have you seen the headlines? They're calling us Priority Lounge Prejudice. Our brand is being dragged through the mud. Another board member, a woman with sharp features and an air of authority, crossed her arms. This isn't just about one incident. It's about our company culture. We've ignored these issues for too long, and now it's coming back to bite us. Edward's jaw tightened. What do you propose we do? The woman leaned forward. We need to engage directly with Jasmine Carter. If we can work with her to craft a meaningful resolution, it could help mitigate the damage. Edward scoffed. You think she'll agree to that? She's already terminated her contract with us. She's not just a businesswoman, the woman countered. She's becoming a symbol of change. If we don't align ourselves with her, we'll lose not just her, but a significant portion of our customer base. Back at Jasmine's office, the floodgates had opened. Messages poured in from individuals sharing their own experiences of discrimination in elite spaces. Some were heart-wrenching accounts of being dismissed, humiliated, or overlooked. Others were stories of resilience and triumph despite systemic barriers. Jasmine read each one, her resolve hardening with every message. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a former Solara employee who had worked in customer service for over a decade. The letter described a toxic workplace culture where employees of color were routinely passed over for promotions, subjected to microaggressions, and silenced when they tried to speak up. Jasmine held the letter tightly, her hands trembling with a mixture of anger and determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel small, every voice that had been silenced. She called Anderson. "We're going public," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't just about Solara. It's about exposing the broader issue. I want to use my platform to amplify these voices." Anderson didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll start coordinating with our media contacts." The press conference was held in a large, sunlit auditorium. Reporters from major news outlets packed the room, their cameras trained on the podium. Jasmine stood before them, a picture of composure and strength. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, her hair pulled back into a sleek bun. Her presence commanded the room. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but powerful. "What happened to me in Solara's lounge was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. A culture of exclusion and bias that has persisted for far too long." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Since the incident, I've heard from countless individuals who have shared their own stories. Stories of being dismissed, disrespected, and made to feel as though they didn't belong. These are not just stories. They are lived realities that deserve to be acknowledged and addressed." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. "I'm calling for a full investigation into Solara Airlines and its practices," Jasmine continued. "But this is bigger than one company. It's about creating systemic change across industries. It's about ensuring that no one is ever made to feel as though their worth is determined by the color of their skin or the biases of others." The reporters erupted with questions as Jasmine stepped away from the podium. Anderson joined her at her side, his expression one of quiet pride. Together, they had set the stage for a movement that would ripple far beyond the walls of Solara's boardrooms. Behind closed doors, Solara's executives scrambled to respond. The company issued another statement, promising sweeping reforms and pledging to work with independent investigators to address the allegations. But the damage was already done. Shares of Solara Airlines plummeted as customers began canceling their memberships in protest. The hashtag boycott Solara trended worldwide. Edward Langston sat in his office, staring out the window at the city skyline. For the first time, he felt the weight of his own complicity. He had spent years ignoring the warning signs, brushing off complaints as isolated incidents. Now it was clear, this wasn't just a PR crisis, it was a reckoning. Jasmine, meanwhile, felt a renewed sense of purpose. The movement she had sparked was growing, and she was determined to see it through. Her inbox was flooded with messages from advocacy groups, activists, and even other corporations eager to partner with her in pushing for change. That evening, she sat in her living room, her laptop open as she drafted her next steps. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. This wasn't just about holding Solara accountable. It was about redefining what equity and inclusion meant in every industry, every boardroom, and every corner of society. As the sun set over the city, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. The spark had been lit, and the fire was spreading. Change was on the horizon, and she would ensure it burned brightly for everyone. The battle lines are drawn. The fallout from the Solara Airlines incident had grown into a full-fledged societal reckoning, What started as a viral video had ignited a firestorm of debate about systemic bias and corporate accountability. Across industries, companies scrambled to reevaluate their practices as activists, customers, and employees demanded change. For Jasmine Carter, however, the fight was only beginning. The sunlight streamed into Jasmine's office the morning after her press conference, but the atmosphere was far from tranquil. Jasmine's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, emails, and calls from media outlets, advocacy groups, and supporters. Her assistant, Elena, hurried in, her face a mixture of excitement and urgency. "Ms. Carter," Elena began, holding a thick folder, "you've been contacted by 3 civil rights organizations. They want to collaborate on a larger campaign addressing systemic discrimination in the aviation and hospitality industries." Jasmine nodded, flipping through the folder. "Schedule a meeting with them," she said. "This is bigger than Solara. If we can work together, we can push for lasting change." Elena hesitated before continuing. "Also, Solara's legal team reached out. They're requesting a private meeting with you and our legal counsel. They're offering to settle." Jasmine looked up, her expression unreadable. "A settlement?" Her tone was calm, but laced with quiet determination. "They think they can pay their way out of this." Elena nodded. "It seems so." Jasmine closed the folder and set it aside. "Tell them no. We don't need their money. We need them to take responsibility, publicly." At Solara Airlines headquarters, the mood was dire. Edward Langston, the regional director, stood at the head of a long conference table, his expression grim. Around him sat the airline's top executives, their faces etched with worry. A large screen on the wall displayed the company's plummeting stock price, a sharp red line that seemed to mirror their sinking fortunes. "We're hemorrhaging customers," one executive said, flipping through a report. "Cancellations are up 30% this week alone. And the hashtag Boycott Solara campaign has reached over 10 million tweets." Edward pinched the bridge of his nose. "What about our statement? Has it helped at all?" Another executive shook her head. "Not enough. People don't trust us anymore. They think our promises of reform are empty words." Edward glanced at the general counsel, a sharp-eyed woman in a gray suit. "What's the status of our legal negotiations with Ms. Carter?" "She declined our offer to settle," the lawyer replied. "She's refusing any private resolution. It's clear she's focused on making this a public battle." Edward sighed deeply. "We need a new approach, something drastic." The room fell silent as the executives exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one of them spoke. "What if we offered her a role in shaping our reforms? A position on a diversity and inclusion board, perhaps?" Edward frowned, considering the idea. "You think she'd accept?" "She might," the executive replied. "It would show we're serious about change. And if she's involved, it might help repair our reputation." Edward nodded slowly. "Fine. Reach out to her team. But tread carefully. If this backfires, we're finished." Jasmine's team was gathered in her conference room when Solara's latest offer came in. The email outlined the airline's proposal, a high-profile role on a newly formed diversity and inclusion advisory board, with a substantial budget and decision-making authority. Anderson Quinn read the email aloud, his tone skeptical. "It's an interesting move," he said, setting the paper down. "They're clearly desperate." Jasmine tapped a pen against the table, deep in thought. "It's tempting," she admitted, "but it feels more like a PR stunt than a genuine commitment." Claire, the young PR advisor, spoke up. "It's a risk, but it could be an opportunity. If you accept, you'd have a platform to push for real change from within." Anderson nodded. "True, but it also puts you in their pocket. If they don't follow through, you'll be the one taking the blame." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, considering their points. Finally, she spoke. "We'll respond with conditions. If they're serious, they'll agree. If not, we'll know this is just another hollow gesture." Solara's executives were unprepared for the ultimatum Jasmine delivered. Her conditions were clear. The advisory board must operate independently, with no interference from Solara's executives. The airline must agree to a full external audit of its hiring practices, employee treatment, and customer service policies. Solara must allocate substantial funds to implement the board's recommendations. All findings from the audit must be made public. Edward Langston read the email, his face growing paler with each point. "She's demanding full transparency," he muttered. "This isn't a negotiation, it's a takeover." The board was divided. Some argued that accepting Jasmine's terms was their only chance to salvage the company's reputation. Others feared the precedent it would set. After hours of heated debate, Edward made the call. "We accept her conditions," he said grimly. "If we don't, we're finished anyway." The announcement of the new Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board made headlines, but Jasmine knew the fight was far from over. She immediately began assembling a team of experts, civil rights advocates, legal scholars, and grassroots organizers to ensure the board's work was impactful and uncompromising. As the board's first meeting approached, Jasmine felt a mix of determination and trepidation. She knew the road ahead would be challenging. Solara's executives were likely hoping she would play it safe, but Jasmine had no intention of pulling punches. On the day of the meeting, Jasmine walked into Solara's headquarters with her head held high. The glossy, modern building exuded power and privilege, but Jasmine felt no intimidation. She was here to dismantle the very culture that building symbolized. The boardroom was filled with familiar faces: Edward Langston, the airline's general counsel, and several other executives. But there were also new faces, members of Jasmine's team, each chosen for their expertise and dedication to justice. Edward rose to greet her, his smile strained. "Miss Carter," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for agreeing to work with us." Jasmine shook his hand firmly. "Let's get to work," she replied. As the meeting began, it became clear that Jasmine's presence had shifted the power dynamics. She spoke with authority, challenging the executives' assumptions and pushing for bold reforms. Every suggestion she made was backed by evidence and supported by her team. By the end of the day, it was clear to everyone in the room: Jasmine Carter was not here to play nice. She was here to make history. Outside the boardroom, the world watched closely. Social media buzzed with updates from the meeting, and news outlets reported on the developments with breathless anticipation. Jasmine's fight had become a symbol of resistance against systemic injustice, inspiring others to speak out and demand change in their own industries. For Jasmine, the battle lines had been drawn. The fight was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever came next. This wasn't just about reforming Solara Airlines. It was about creating a new standard of accountability, one that would resonate far beyond the skies. Building a new legacy. The first meeting of Solara's newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board was a watershed moment, not just for the airline, but for the broader corporate world. The room, once a space of exclusive decision-making by a homogeneous elite, now represented something radically different. Activists, academics, legal experts, and representatives from underrepresented communities filled the seats, their presence a testament to Jasmine Carter's unyielding resolve. Jasmine arrived at Solara's headquarters early that morning, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. She wore a sharp navy blazer over a white blouse, a quiet symbol of professionalism and purpose. The media frenzy outside the building was relentless, with reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing. Jasmine ignored them, her focus unwavering. Inside the boardroom, Edward Langston and a handful of Solara executives sat stiffly, their expressions a mix of wariness and forced politeness. The tension was palpable as Jasmine entered, flanked by members of her team. "Good morning," Jasmine said, her voice steady but commanding. She set her briefcase on the table and began unpacking her materials, reports, proposals, and a sleek tablet loaded with data. The quiet rustle of papers seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment. Edward rose from his seat. "Ms. Carter," he began, his tone carefully measured, "thank you for agreeing to chair this board. We're committed to supporting your efforts. Jasmine gave a small, polite smile. Commitment is a good start, she replied. But actions will speak louder than words. Let's get to work. The meeting began with a presentation from Jasmine, outlining the scope of the board's mission. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of conviction as she described the changes that needed to take place. Our goal isn't just to address the specific incident that brought us here, she said, her eyes sweeping the room. It's to dismantle the systems and practices that allowed that incident to happen in the first place. This isn't about damage control. It's about transformation. She clicked through slides on the large screen at the front of the room, each one filled with data, hiring statistics, employee satisfaction surveys, customer feedback, and comparisons to industry benchmarks. The numbers painted a stark picture of inequity, bias, and exclusion. Solara Airlines has long prided itself on being a leader in luxury and exclusivity, Jasmine continued. But that exclusivity has come at a cost. It's time to redefine what leadership means. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while the other board members nodded in agreement. Jasmine's presentation was impossible to refute. The data spoke for itself. Over the next several hours, the board tackled a series of critical issues. Workplace culture. Former Solara employees shared their experiences of microaggressions, bias in promotions, and lack of representation in leadership roles. Jasmine proposed a complete overhaul of the company's diversity training programs, emphasizing empathy, accountability, and cultural competence. Customer relations. The board examined complaints from customers who had faced discrimination or poor treatment. Jasmine insisted that the company implement a zero-tolerance policy for bias, backed by thorough investigations and swift consequences. Transparency and accountability. Jasmine pushed for the creation of a public-facing dashboard where Solara would publish regular updates on its diversity metrics and progress toward equity goals. Accountability must be visible, she said firmly. Edward Langston, though clearly uncomfortable, found himself nodding along. The changes Jasmine was proposing were bold, even revolutionary, but they were also necessary. As the meeting drew to a close, Jasmine stood to deliver her final remarks. The room was silent as she spoke, her words resonating deeply. This isn't just about fixing Solara Airlines, she said. It's about setting a new standard for what corporate accountability looks like. It's about proving that businesses can thrive without perpetuating exclusion and inequity. If we succeed, Solara won't just recover, it will become a model for the world to follow. The room erupted into quiet applause. Even Edward clapped, though his expression remained guarded. Outside the boardroom, the world was watching. News outlets live-streamed updates, and social media platforms buzzed with anticipation. As Jasmine emerged from the meeting, reporters swarmed her, their questions overlapping in a cacophony of sound. Ms. Carter, how do you feel about today's meeting? Do you believe Solara can truly change? What's next for the advisory board? Jasmine paused briefly, her calm demeanor commanding attention. Today was a step in the right direction, she said. But this is only the beginning. Real change takes time, effort, and accountability. We're committed to seeing this through. The advisory board's work quickly began to bear fruit. Within weeks, Solara Airlines rolled out new policies aimed at fostering inclusivity and equity. Job postings were rewritten to emphasize diversity, and recruitment efforts were expanded to reach underrepresented communities. Customer service training programs were revamped, and employees who had perpetuated bias were disciplined or removed. Jasmine's transparency dashboard went live, allowing the public to track the airline's progress. It was a bold move, and one that earned Solara both praise and scrutiny. The airline's leadership knew they were under the microscope, but they also knew they had no choice. The stakes were too high. For Jasmine, the work was exhausting but deeply rewarding. Her days were filled with meetings, interviews, and strategy sessions. Her inbox overflowed with messages from people around the world, some offering support, others sharing their own stories of discrimination and resilience. One evening, As she sat in her home office reviewing the latest board reports, she received an email that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a young woman named Simone, who had watched Jasmine's press conference and felt compelled to reach out. "I just wanted to say thank you." The email read, "I work in an industry where I'm constantly overlooked because of my race and gender. Seeing you stand up to Solara gave me hope. You've inspired me to speak out and fight for change in my own workplace. You've shown me that it's possible." Jasmine read the email twice, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and humility. This was why she fought. Not for headlines or accolades, but for people like Simone. People who deserve to be seen, heard, and valued. She composed a quick reply, her fingers moving deftly across the keyboard. "Thank you, Simone. Your courage is what inspires me. Never stop fighting for what you deserve." As the weeks turned into months, Solara Airlines began to transform. The changes weren't easy, and there were plenty of setbacks along the way. But under Jasmine's leadership, the advisory board remained steadfast. Their work was about more than repairing a company's image. It was about building a legacy of justice, equity, and inclusion. For Jasmine, the fight was far from over. But as she looked out at the city skyline one quiet evening, she felt a deep sense of purpose. The battle lines had been drawn, and the work was hard, but it was worth it. Change was coming, and she wouldn't stop until the world she envisioned became a reality. A legacy forged in fire. 6 months had passed since Jasmine Carter first walked into the Solara Airlines lounge, unknowingly stepping into the storm that would change her life and the corporate world forever. The fight had been grueling, marked by long nights, heated debates, and moments of doubt. But as she sat in her office, surrounded by reports and updates from the Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board, Jasmine knew it had been worth it. The world had watched as Solara Airlines underwent a transformation unlike anything the aviation industry had seen before. The transparency dashboard that Jasmine had championed became a cornerstone of the airline's operations, updating the public on key metrics like diversity in hiring, employee satisfaction, and customer complaint resolutions. Other companies had taken notice, with several announcing their own plans to implement similar measures. Jasmine's name had become a beacon for those advocating for equity and justice. Invitations to speak at conferences, universities, and corporate events poured in. She accepted only a few, preferring to focus on the work itself rather than the accolades. Still, her presence at these events often left audiences inspired, her words carrying the weight of lived experience and unwavering determination. One rainy afternoon, Jasmine sat at her desk, reviewing a report on Solara's latest diversity initiatives. The airline had implemented a mentorship program for underrepresented employees, launched a scholarship fund for aspiring aviation professionals from marginalized backgrounds, and established partnerships with advocacy groups to ensure accountability. Progress was steady, but Jasmine knew there was still much to be done. Her assistant, Elena, entered the office with a hesitant smile. "Miss Carter, there's someone here to see you." Jasmine looked up. "Who is it?" "It's Edward Langston," Elena replied. "He says it's important." Jasmine nodded, her curiosity piqued. "Send him in." Edward entered the room, his usual air of corporate authority tempered by something softer, perhaps humility, or the weight of everything that had transpired. He extended a hand, which Jasmine shook firmly. "Ms. Carter," Edward began, taking a seat across from her desk. "Thank you for seeing me." "What brings you here, Mr. Langston?" Jasmine asked, her tone polite but guarded. Edward exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "not just for what you've done for Solara, but for what you've taught me. When this all started, I saw you as an adversary, someone who was challenging everything I thought I knew about leadership and business. But now I see you as a teacher." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, surprised by his candor. "That's unexpected," she admitted. Edward smiled faintly. "I don't expect you to forgive the way I handled things in the beginning, but I want you to know that I've learned. I've seen how blind I was to the biases and systemic issues that permeated our company. And I'm committed to ensuring that the changes we've made aren't just temporary fixes. They're the foundation of a better future. Jasmine regarded him for a moment, searching for any trace of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded. I'm glad to hear that, Edward. But remember, this isn't about me. It's about the people who've been harmed by the system we're trying to change. If you're truly committed, then keep doing the work, even when it's uncomfortable. Edward nodded solemnly. I will. Later that evening, Jasmine attended a gala honoring trailblazers in corporate social responsibility. The room was filled with influential figures from business, politics, and advocacy, all eager to meet the woman who had taken on one of the most powerful airlines in the world. As she mingled with the crowd, Jasmine was approached by a young woman in her early 20s. She was nervous, clutching a small notebook to her chest. Ms. Carter, the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. I just wanted to say thank you. What you've done has inspired me to pursue a career in law. I want to fight for people who don't have a voice. Jasmine smiled warmly, placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. That's the greatest compliment I could receive, she said. Remember, it's not about the size of the battle. It's about the strength of your conviction. Keep fighting for what's right. The woman beamed, her nervousness replaced with determination. Jasmine watched her disappear into the crowd, her heart swelling with pride. Moments like these reminded her why she had chosen to fight. As the months turned into a year, Solara Airlines began to see the fruits of its transformation. Customer satisfaction scores climbed steadily, and employee turnover rates dropped significantly. The airline's public image, once tarnished by scandal, began to recover. While skeptics remained, the transparency and accountability that Jasmine had demanded spoke volumes. Jasmine herself had become a reluctant public figure, her story serving as a rallying cry for those pushing for systemic change. She was often asked what she had learned from the experience, and her answer was always the same. Change is never easy, and it's rarely quick. But when you stand firm in your values and refuse to accept the status quo, you can move mountains. It takes courage, resilience, and a willingness to face discomfort head-on. But most importantly, it takes people who believe in something bigger than themselves. On the anniversary of the lounge incident, Jasmine sat in her office, reflecting on the journey. She thought of the countless messages she had received, the stories she had heard, and the people she had met along the way. The fight wasn't over, far from it, but the progress they had made was undeniable. Her phone buzzed with a notification, Solara Airlines Transparency Dashboard Update. Jasmine opened the link and smiled as she read the latest data. Representation in leadership roles had increased by 40%. Customer complaints about discrimination had dropped by 60%. And the mentorship program had already produced its first round of promotions. Change was happening, not just at Solara, but across industries. Other companies had followed Solara's lead, implementing similar reforms and committing to transparency. The ripple effect was undeniable. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow over her office, Jasmine felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The road ahead would still be difficult, but she was ready. After all, legacies weren't built on easy victories. They were forged in fire. And Jasmine Carter was just getting started.